Hello, everyone. Dr. Christine Smith back for a wonderful talk today about the thyroid and hyperthyroidism with Dr. Osansky. And we wanted to really dive into this because I think the thyroid is a misunderstood organ, and I think it can be confusing when you're looking at all the different markers. And this is just an area of his passion that he has been exploring for decades and really helping a lot of clients with. So, hello, Dr. Osansky. I would love if you could introduce yourself to everyone and share a little bit about yourself and how you fell in love with this particular organ and working with people dealing with this.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Dr. Smith. Appreciate the opportunity to share what I know about thyroid health and my experience. And yeah, so just like you, I'm a doctor of chiropractic, and for a number of years, I was just focusing solely on chiropractic, and but I always had a passion for nutrition, and so whenever I would take my continuing education credits, it would always be, or almost always, like something related to nutrition, and there were a couple of functional medicine endocrinology courses and or seminars, I guess not courses, but seminars, and I remember that they spoke about thyroid health, both hypo and hyper, and I never thought I would need to utilize them personally, but in 2008, I was diagnosed with hyperthyroidism and eventually Graves disease. And yeah, I mean, prior to that, I was exercising, I was dieting, detoxifying, so I was losing weight and attributed it to the dieting and exercising, which I'm sure initially it was, but eventually I took my heart rate at one of those automated blood pressure machines, and my blood pressure was fine, but my heart rate was elevated, and then I started putting the pieces together. And again, I didn't know a whole lot about hyperthyroidism at the time, but once I was diagnosed with hyperthyroidism and then Graves, I knew that I knew there were natural options out there from my experience taking those seminars. And so I didn't know if they would work because again, I was my first patient, and yeah, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to at least give them a try. There's a time and place, as you know, for medication, but I decided to give the herbs, and we could talk about that if you want, what exactly I did. But long story short, I was able to avoid the medication as well as the more harsh methods like radioactive iodine thyroid surgery, which is common in those with hyperthyroidism, changed my diet, made other lifestyle changes. And then I started to work with others. I just realized that there are so many people with thyroid and autoimmune thyroid conditions that aren't getting the help they need. And the endocrinologists are pretty much just giving, well, in the case of hyperthyroidism, it's just anti-thyroid medication, radioactive iodine thyroid surgery. In the case, as you know, with Hashimoto's, it's usually just thyroid hormone replacement, and that's, the only option. They're not doing anything for the underlying cause, not doing anything for immune system. And so, yeah, since 2009, I've been working with people with both hyper and Hashimoto's, hyperthyroidism and Hashimoto's, but the majority of my practice consists of those with hyperthyroidism, including Graves, just because of my experience. And there's not a lot of practitioners focusing on hyperthyroidism compared to a good number that focus on helping people with Hashimoto's.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that story because I know there's no time that you learn more than when you go through your own journey as a practitioner. And for anyone who's curious, out of this, he has written two different books about thyroid health. One is called Natural Treatment Solutions for Hyperthyroidism and Graves Disease, and the other one is about Hashimoto's triggers. So anyone who has that amount of knowledge is always going to be a phenomenal source to help us understand this organ more. So I would love if we could discuss a little bit like the role of thyroid hormones in the body, how you describe it to your clients, and then the different markers that really make a complete thyroid panel. Because I think a lot of people think like just TSH is the only thing you need to check, um, but really understanding what these markers mean, and then we can dive a little bit into the difference between Graves and Hashimoto's.
Yeah, so I mean, thyroid hormone's so important. It controls pretty much every cell, tissue in the body. There's thyroid receptors all over the body, and it highly responsible for the metabolic rate. And it makes sense. That's why if someone has hypothyroidism, typically they'll experience symptoms such as weight gain, fatigue, brain fog, everything's like slowing down. And then with hyperthyroidism, you get everything sped up, or so you get increased resting heart rate, palpitations, anxiety, insomnia. I mean, but there's some overlap with both conditions. You could get hair loss with either hyper or hypothyroid. And again, sometimes like people with hyperthyroidism will gain weight and not lose weight, and for numerous reasons. But like constipation, more common with hypothyroidism, and Hashimoto's, loose stools, diarrhea, more common with hyperthyroidism. And so, yeah, I mean, thyroid hormone just, it's important when it comes to like DNA and just, I mean, again, it just so important. And unfortunately, most doctors make light of it. Again, someone has, we could definitely talk about the blood test, because you're right. Even when it comes to looking at the blood test, most doctors just look at either TSH by itself or just free T4. And you really do want to do an entire panel and look at the antibodies and monitor the antibodies. And again, most doctors, I mean, they'll monitor the blood test, but in the case of hyperthyroidism, they're not doing anything for again, with Graves' disease and Hashimoto's, both are more immune system conditions than thyroid conditions. And we, again, could talk about the mechanisms beyond those as well, because those are different, of course. But I mean, when it
I'd love,
comes to, yeah.
or I was going to
Mhm.
say, I'd love to discuss just like a little bit about, yeah, the different markers, and we can go into it. But you also mentioned something about its effect on DNA. I'd love if you could expand on that a little bit as we start talking about the markers.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that thyroid hormone, it's more, it affects us on a cellular level. It's just, I mean, trying to make it easy to understand, but I mean, really, it's not just like, again, I mentioned metabolism, which, everybody understands that, but it goes, really deeper than that. And, just affects the mitochondria, which are the energy powerhouses of the cell. And that's really, when you talk about metabolism, that's what, like, again, if, with, with thyroid hormones important for mitochondriogenesis, so the production of mitochondria. So if you don't have enough thyroid hormone, that's going to affect the production of mitochondria. And again, that's going to affect ATP production. And again, it's going to affect you, not, I mean, energy wise, of course, but when it comes to hyperthyroidism, you get also you get a lot of oxidative stress, which and that's also typical of autoimmunity in general, like Hashimoto's and Graves, not just hyperthyroidism. But on top of that, you have increased thyroid hormone levels, and that also is going to affect the mitochondria, but in a different way. Whereas like with hypo, you're not getting enough formation of mitochondria. With hyperthyroidism, you're getting that oxidative stress, which can cause mitochondrial dysfunction. And then in some cases, that could lead to fatigue. Like when I dealt with hyperthyroidism, honestly, I wasn't really fatigued. If anything, I felt more, hyped up, I guess you could say. But when someone's fatigued, there could be numerous reasons. Obviously, there's adrenals, nutrient deficiencies, but it could also be the oxidative stress that's impacting, the mitochondria, and that in turn is also affecting ATP production.
That was beautifully said. And I just want to, I'll give like a little metaphor I like to give people about the different markers, and then we can kind of dive into what comes up on the labs, and then definitely the difference if like the antibody markers are present. So one of the ways that I like to explain thyroid is I call it like your fuel manager of your body, right? So it's the signal that goes out and lets your body know what to do with its energy and with its fuel. And so it affects metabolic regulation, it has cardiovascular effects, affects development and growth, lipid, carbohydrate metabolism, even neurological functions, which is why you can kind of get the brain fog if you have low thyroid or hyperactive mind with hyperthyroid. Can even affect your reproductive system and like your heat that your body produces and your temperature, which is why you get cold when you have less thyroid hormone. So it goes and it acts, like the hormone itself acts on the cell and acts on the mitochondria. And as Dr. Osansky just said, it actually affects the mitochondria's ability to reproduce, but it also is what stimulates them to go through the process of producing energy for your cell. And so one of the ways that I like to think about the markers is kind of like a dispatch station. So you have TSH, thyroid stimulating hormones coming from your brain, stimulating your thyroid. That can be high if you have low thyroid function, because it's like, hey, I'm stimulating you, come on, let's keep sending more signals. Or it can be low if you have hyperthyroid function, which is like, there's too much going on. Okay, like stop stimulating it. And so that's kind of like the dispatch signal going out, telling the cars from the dispatch station where to go. T4 is kind of like the car leaving the station and going to wherever it needs to go. And then in order for it to actually function, it has to be converted into T3, which is like the person getting out of the car to go and do their job. And so we can have good T4, but we're struggling with our conversion. Or we can have low T4 overall, and then it makes us have low T3 overall, which is the active form. There's also something called reverse T3, and I'd love to actually get your thoughts on this because it is used as a mortality predictor in hospitals. So I don't understand why people don't use it more in preventative care, but it's basically like a regulator. It's like a governor for your thyroid, because if you're fighting an infection, your body might want to retain energy for that infection, and it doesn't want to be pushing your cells and your energy really high. So your reverse T3 can go up when you're dealing with inflammation. And so it's just like a good indicator for that. So it's kind of like if someone drove their car to the site, got out of the car to go in and do their job, it's like someone standing at the door and being like, you can't come in. And then we have our antibodies, right? And antibodies is when our system starts to develop basically an immune response accidentally to our own organ. I'm going to let Dr. Osansky go much deeper into this. But the basic way I think about it is TPO antibodies, which is thyroid peroxidase. But TPO antibodies, if we have that, it's basically affecting our thyroid organ itself and making us have Hashimoto symptoms, low thyroid function. And if we have thyroglobulin antibodies, it almost acts as a mimic of a thyroid hormone, and it accidentally overstimulates the thyroid. And then that's how we get hyperthyroid function. So I know that was kind of like more of a basic explanation, but I'd love for you to dive into that and explain it in your own way, however you like.
Yeah, sure. Well, I love your analogies. I mean, it just makes it easy for people to understand. And yeah, you're right. I mean, there's it's you pretty much said everything I would have said about TSH. It's from the pituitary gland, so it's more of it's not a thyroid hormone actually. It's a pituitary hormone. And yeah, you're right. When someone has too low of a thyroid hormone, it'll be elevated. When someone has too much thyroid hormone, it'll be depressed. Also, it's worth mentioning that a lot of doctors look at lab ranges and not optimal ranges. So like TSH might be 3.5, which is within most lab ranges, like the reference range, but optimal, depending on who you ask, would be, between 1 and 2. Some would say between 1 and 1.5. I mean, some functional medicine practitioners might say between 1 and 3, which is kind of broad, but still, even that, if someone's 3.5, they still would be over that as well. So, if anything's too high or too low, even if it's within the range, you want to pay attention. And unfortunately, with all labs, most medical doctors just look for the H or the L on the lab report. If it's red flagged, they'll pay attention to it. If not, they won't. And then, yeah, you're right. With the thyroid hormones, there's T4 that converts into T3, and T3 is the active form of thyroid hormone that actually binds to the receptors. And then and there's also T1, T2. We still don't have a great understanding. I mean, T2 also affects metabolic rate, and now we're seeing like T2 supplements, and people are taking T2 or promoting T2 supplements for like weight loss and all that. But still, that's fairly new. And then you mentioned reverse T3. So T3 again is the active form of T4, like T4 converts into T3, which is the active form of thyroid hormone, and then reverse T3 is the inactive form, of thyroxine or T4. And yeah, it's you're right. When it's elevated, like when you're in a real sick state, have some type of illness, you definitely could see that elevated. And then it's actually elevated in most people with hyperthyroidism, which is why if someone has hypothyroidism or Hashimoto's, I'll test for it and see, like make sure, because it shouldn't be high, in that situation. But if it is, then yeah, there might be something else going on. Or sometimes when someone has that conversion problem of converting T4 to T3, you'll see reverse T3 high. But with hyperthyroidism, you'll see it elevated almost all the time. So honestly, you have stopped testing for it because I mean, it makes sense. It's really trying to slow things down. It's trying to put the brakes on, the production also. So, if you have hyperthyroidism, you don't want a lot of T3, even though you are going to get a lot of T3. But again, you're also going to get a lot of that reverse T3. And so yeah, you'll see that high most of the time in hyperthyroidism. And then those antibodies. So yeah, there's actually three main antibodies. So one is thyroid peroxidase, as you mentioned. So thyroid peroxidase is actually an enzyme that is important with the manufacture of thyroid hormone. And then, so you're right. I mean, if you get the immune system causing damage to that enzymatic process, you are going to, get a decrease in thyroid hormone, which is associated with Hashimoto's. Uh, Now, the one thing you mentioned, the thyroglobulin antibodies, so there's actually the ones that are associated with Graves are actually called thyroid stimulating immunoglobulins or TSI, and those bind to the TSH receptor, and that they're called stimulating because when they bind to the TSH receptor, they stimulate the production of thyroid hormone, and that will cause what causes hyperthyroidism. Thyroglobulin, it's interesting because so thyroglobulin itself is a protein of the thyroid gland. And so when you have those thyroglobulin antibodies, that means the immune system is attacking and damaging the thyroglobulin. And it could actually result in either hyper or hypo. You could get a hyper state where the immune system damages the thyroid gland, and then you get a rush of thyroid hormone into the bloodstream. And typically it's transient, but when I say transient, it doesn't mean like a few seconds or a few minutes. It could be, but some people it could be like a few days, it's that some refer to it as like Hashitoxicosis because it's actually more associated with Hashimoto's, but you could get that transient hyperthyroid state. And but then it's also damaging that thyroglobulin, which is also, it's part of the thyroid gland and important when it comes to thyroid hormone formation, like TPO. So typically, if you have those antibodies and you're not doing anything to address the autoimmune component, over time you will tend to become hypo. And so yeah, so the thyroglobulin, TPO antibodies usually long term are associated more with hypothyroidism, TSI associated with hyperthyroidism, and people could have multiple antibodies, like I see all the time, where even though the TPO antibodies are more closely associated with Hashimoto's, research shows that about 60 to 80% of people with hyperthyroidism have those TPO antibodies as well. So someone could have hyperthyroidism or let's say Graves, where they have those elevated thyroid stimulating immunoglobulins, and they have the TPO antibodies. And so they might be hyper. And again, if nothing's done to address the autoimmune component, over time, they might become hypo. And same thing if they have all three of those antibodies. They have the TSI, thyroglobulin, TPO, which again, it's not uncommon. Maybe like 20% of people I see have all three. And again, they might initially present as hyper and eventually become hypo. Every now and then I'll see the opposite where someone has a history of Hashimoto's and then all of a sudden they switch to Graves. Um, there's genetics behind that as well. There is a genetic predisposition, but as you know, environment and the health of the gut play a greater role. Just because you have the genetics doesn't mean you'll develop any of these conditions.
That was an amazing explanation. Thank you. And I think we'll dive right back into the environmental factors in a second. But I just wanted to kind of review what he was saying. So if we put it back into that dispatch model, when we're thinking about Hashimoto's, it's basically as if someone has prevented the dispatch station from sending out the signals to the cars, or like we've lost a bunch of cars, there aren't any cars anymore, so we can't get to the site. And then with Graves, it's like we have too many people in the dispatch station basically calling out and sending out too many cars, which I think is where you corrected me. So thank you. I agree with you that it's basically like in Graves disease, you are mimicking TSH, you're mimicking the thyroid stimulating hormone with antibodies that your immune system is producing, and then it makes an overproduction of thyroid. And I also love that you pointed out that when you have damage going on to the thyroid, it can look like Graves' disease initially because you dump a whole bunch of thyroid hormone into the blood as the organ is damaged. But then as it's damaged and it can't repair, then our thyroid hormone goes down. So I want people to understand their physiology, which is why I'm so glad that you're on and we could ask you that, because not everybody can explain it that well. And, there's different people listening to this, and some people want to dive more into the chemistry, which is what we were just discussing, but you can always kind of rely on that little dispatch analysis for when you're just like quickly having a conversation with someone. But let's dive into what can be the common triggers for these conditions, because like you were saying, it's not as simple as just hyper or hypo. It can be both. It can be the fact that the organ is just getting damaged in a variety of ways. Somehow our immune system has gotten overstimulated. What do you find most in practice?
Yeah, well, you mentioned, so I have two books. One of them's called Hashimoto's Triggers. Now, I could have like I could easily like cross out the Hashimoto's and replace it with Graves, and it wouldn't be exactly the same. Obviously, they're different conditions, but when it comes to autoimmunity, there is a lot of overlap when it comes to the triggers. So, again, I'd say probably like at least 75% of what's in that book could apply to Graves when it comes to the triggers. And I mean, it comes down to I talk about four different categories of triggers, like food, stress, chemicals, infections. Some will categorize nutrient deficiencies. I look at those more as like underlying imbalances than really triggers, but still, those could be factors. And then according to like the three-legged stool of autoimmunity, you got the increased intestinal permeability, the leaky gut. So the triad of autoimmunity, you got genetic predisposition, the triggers that I just mentioned, and then essentially a leaky gut. And I just making a just differentiating because again, a leaky gut, some would say that's a trigger. Again, either way, you need to have a healthy gut to have a healthy immune system. But yeah, I mean, I will say out of those four that I just mentioned, at least when it comes to Graves, I would say stress is number one. I mean, just like the number one commonality that I'd say like 80 to 90% of my patients, tell me without me having to like do any testing. I mean, I do like to look at adrenals and see what patterns they have, but even beyond that, like most people aren't going to say, yeah, I'm pretty sure I have a parasite or I have, another type of gut infection. I mean, some people will get the feeling they'll know, yeah, well, things aren't right in the gut. But, again, with stress, commonly, it's really common for people to acknowledge that they have high stress levels, as well as I asked them on the health history to rate their stress handling. And again, a lot of people will put that low. So and again, hard to, it's hard to know. I mean, it's easy to overestimate your stress handling skills because I certainly did when I dealt with Graves. I did not think my adrenals were in as bad of a shape as they were because I did adrenal saliva test and it looked pretty bad. I will say though, and you know this because we had also, this conversation. You are on my podcast and we spoke about different things, but I mean, we spoke about injury, but it's not just when it comes to stress too. It's not just emotional stress. It's also physical stressors. Like I was overtraining. It wasn't just me being stressed out. Just with the practice and family and finances and things that everybody else stresses over. I mean, those certainly were issues, but again, I said in the beginning, when I was diagnosed, I was exercising, dieting, detoxifying, but I didn't say that I was over exercising. I was exercising too much, and I'm sure that was putting a major, that was a major stressor on my adrenals, on my mitochondria, as we mentioned earlier about mitochondria. I mean, so that's I think a big factor. I mean, food obviously is big with a lot of people. We're all familiar with, or most probably are listening to this or watching this familiar with gluten as being a potential trigger. But even if it doesn't trigger, autoimmunity could also affect the permeability of the gut. So yeah, I would say stress number one. I would say, again, food is up there too, but it's hard to know too because again, we live in such a toxic world that when we talk, like when looking at the environmental toxin, I think that's one of the, if not the number one thing that has changed over the last few decades is just our toxic burden just getting higher and higher. I mean, we've always had stress. Now we could say, for like, in 2020, the stress was higher, because of the pandemic and all that, but there's always stressors. I mean, again, and everybody's perception of stress is different. So yeah, I don't think we could say that has really changed over the years. I mean, yeah, maybe people are more stressed out, but without question, the environmental toxicants that we're exposed to is huge, and that makes us more susceptible to things like infections, the viruses and all that. To me, it's more of an immune system problem than a virus problem. But um, anyway, so yeah, I'm kind of rambling on here a little bit, but those, yeah, those are some of the big triggers. Like I said, stress, food, again, chemicals, are big, and we could talk more about each of these. Again, some, in cases, infections, viruses. Speak about the pandemic. I mean, I had so many people coming into the practice with hyperthyroidism and Hashimoto to some extent, but even in the literature, if you do some research, about certain viruses and hyperthyroidism as well as Hashimoto's, there's plenty out there. And yeah, anyway, so those are some of the main factors that could be a trigger of both Graves and Hashimoto's.
I think you hit it spot on. It's just the accumulation of all of these together, right? And I talk about injury, you talk about stress. We're essentially talking about the same thing. It's basically what are the stressors on your body? And a really simple way to think of it is thoughts, traumas, toxins. Traumas being physical, thoughts being mental, toxins being environmental. And that's why food is so confusing, is it's just coated in toxins these days. It's like, unless you are literally regularly doing research on how to read labels, which is why we do this, is so we can kind of teach you guys, it's really hard to keep track. Like there's that new like appeal chemical that they're putting on a whole bunch of fruits and stuff, which is basically just permeating the entire fruit and can really affect your system and your hormones. And our bodies can handle a lot, but evolutionarily they're more designed to like handle bacteria and viruses. We're not totally designed to handle all the chemicals that we're dealing with. And I think of the thyroid as the sentinel of the body, right? It's this very highly sensitive organ. And so if something's off with the thyroid, it means like look at what threw it off, because you are close to threshold or at threshold. And that's what we refer to as allostatic load, or the overall capacity of your body. So I think that was a great description. Um, with this, what can be used to address this? Or like you had mentioned some herbs that you had used in your own health journey. And I mean, it's really easy to just talk about problems, but that's scary. And I always love to talk about solutions for people. So what are some of the solutions you like?
Yeah, so I mean, getting back to the herbs, those are mainly for symptom management purposes, which for hyperthyroidism, it is important. If someone has a resting heart rate of, 120, you want to lower it. And that's why a lot of people will take anti-thyroid medication or beta blockers, which again, there's a time and place for those. But yeah, the herbs I took bugleweed, which is an herb that helps to lower thyroid hormones. It has anti-thyroid properties. I also took motherwort, which is more of like a natural beta blocker. And so those were really effective. Again, they don't work on everybody, but if someone's not doing anything because they don't want to take the medication, because anti-thyroid medication such as methimazole has a lot of side effects, so some people don't want to take it. And again, I can't tell someone not to take it or to take it, but if someone on their own chooses not to take it, there is the herbs and there L-carnitine, which I'm sure you're familiar with, in higher amounts, has been shown to have anti-thyroid effects too, like blocking thyroid hormones. So if you're taking it, like 500 to 1,000 milligrams is commonly given to like, support like fatty acid oxidation and all that. And that doesn't seem like it has, depressive effect on thyroid. But if someone's taking like 2 to 4,000 milligrams per day, consistently, that could, in some cases, also help. And yeah, so those are keeping you safe while you're finding and removing your triggers and correcting underlying imbalances. And, when it comes to stress and adrenals, I mean, there's no replacement for diet and lifestyle. So, I mean, I definitely did take supplements. I took some herbs like licorice root because I had low cortisol levels, and licorice root extends the life of cortisol. It can also raise blood pressure. And again, so you want to be cautious specifically with licorice root, the B vitamins, especially like B5, B6, help support adrenals, vitamin C. But yeah, obviously you want to eat whole healthy food, try to minimize sugars as well as not overdo it with the carbohydrates. And then stress management is huge, trying to block out time really on a daily basis. I think, that's the thing that, like a lot of people I work with, they're prepared to change their diet. Not that they want to change their diet, but and a lot of people have already done that, but a lot of people struggle with the stress management aspect. And it's, I think, something that I tell people just start with 5 minutes per day and just do it every day to get in the routine of doing stress management, whether it's, meditation, deep breathing, whatever type of mind body medicine or stress management technique you want to incorporate. Either way, make sure you get in the routine of doing that. And then you could gradually increase the duration. And then, of course, sleep. Sleep is important foundation. And sometimes we need help with sleep, especially if someone has hyperthyroidism and they have palpitations at night and anxiety at night. Again, hopefully either the medication or the herbs that you're taking will help with that. But there could be other factors, of course, disrupting sleep that you might need to address. So you definitely want to do the basics. And then when it comes to, again, diet, I agree with you. Like, is it gluten or is it glyphosate? I mean, there's, like, because again, it's the chemicals affecting our food. And, just that's why you want to try your best to eat organic, which isn't perfect. It's not like you'll completely avoid the glyphosate if you're eating 100% organic food, but at least you'll minimize that. You'll minimize, other chemicals and, or trying to avoid drinking waters out of plastic bottles, which are endocrine disruptors. So, if you have a thyroid problem, you definitely, I mean, I guess you can make the argument if you have hyperthyroidism, maybe you want to disrupt the thyroid, but probably not that way. You don't want to do it with drinking out of plastic bottles. So yeah, definitely avoid, um, as much as you can, the chemicals, the products you use at home, the cleaners, the cosmetics, and doing things to support detoxification, diet, like eating plenty of vegetables, can help. And cruciferous vegetables really good for supporting detoxification. And yeah, just I mean, obviously there's supplements like N-acetylcysteine, liposomal glutathione, sauna therapy in some cases. If you have hyperthyroidism, you want to be careful because sauna also increases your heart rate. And if you already have an elevated heart rate, you might want to like stay away from sauna, which I do regularly. I do 3 times a week, so I'm definitely a big fan of sauna. You just want to be careful. But yeah, just so optimize adrenals, and clean up your diet, get quality sleep, reduce your toxic burden. If you have any gut issues, again, it depends on what's causing a gut issue. Sometimes just cleaning up your diet will help, but if you do have something like, if you have some type of gut infection, or if you have an overgrowth of candida or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, then you might need to either take like antimicrobial herbs, or in some cases, you might have to take medication, for like an antifungal, prescription antifungal in some cases, or in some cases, rifaximin for SIBO. But yeah, I mean, again, it's complex. It's autoimmunity, and not just autoimmune. Even if someone has a non-autoimmune thyroid condition, it could be also complex. But you always want to try to address the cause of the problem. And I'll say this, I mean, you could definitely, well, of course, we're going to be biased and we're going to say, well, it's probably good to work with a practitioner. You definitely could do a lot on your own with diet and lifestyle. So, I mean, just you could start eating healthy today. You could start blocking out time for stress management today, working on, getting better sleep, especially if you're intentionally like staying up late, like doing whatever you're doing and neglecting sleep, so those are things you could focus on. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people could benefit from digging deeper if you do, especially if you do have underlying issues with the gut, or you need some additional support for detoxification. But yeah, don't, again, if you're not in a position to see a functional medicine practitioner, don't let that hold you back from making those diet and lifestyle changes.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that's why you wrote your books, is just to make it more available for people because everyone comes in at different stages for their readiness of where they're at in their health journey. And you really can do a lot by yourself, which is why he and I do educational stuff like this. Like, we want you guys to feel empowered around your body. And so just being more mindful in your life of those toxins and like, oh, like maybe I won't heat my food in a plastic container. Maybe I'll start using more glass. Maybe I'll try to bring um, a container to the coffee shop instead of using the plastic cups, and maybe I'll just switch my laundry detergent and get a water filter. And those things that you like get once and then you don't really think about them again because they're just there and they're a part of your life, like water filters, air filters, laundry detergent. Like, you just switch your brand, right? So as we start to decrease this toxic load on the body, our immune system becomes less confused and can actually correct the things that it's doing incorrectly. So that's a general way to think about kind of that environmental exposure piece. And I guess as we start to kind of wind down, I would love to hear what you think the biggest hurdle in people's health is these days, and just things that you've been focusing on learning as a practitioner and that you just think are really cool things to know, just to share with people.
Yeah, it's really, really hard to focus on one hurdle because I mean there are definitely, I mean, some of the things we spoke about. I mean, I think I mean, we could say the environmental toxins that we're exposed to are perhaps the biggest hurdle, just because again, I mean, there are things we could do to reduce our toxic burden, but it's not like someone's going to do a 3 week detox and that's it. I mean, because we're going to be constantly bombarded. So it's really something you need to be aware of. And the most you could do is your home. I mean, you could do more in your home, obviously, that you could do outside. So I would say focus there. Um, and again, the stress. I mean, so I would say if there's two, the toxic burden, just dealing with the stress and just you're probably not going to get rid of all your stressors. And some people arguably have worse stressors than others. And, when you can't change it, all you could do is try to improve your perception of the stressor and try to, improve your stress handling. And yeah, so, and I mean, I'm always looking to learn new things. I mean, one thing that we didn't talk about, which I'll say briefly, which a lot of people with Graves have, is something called thyroid disease. And thyroid disease is when you have the immune. So we mentioned with Graves, you have the thyroid stimulating immunoglobulins, those antibodies actually binding to the TSH receptors, causing the hyperthyroidism. Those same receptors can also, or the same antibodies can bind to the tissues of the eyes and cause swelling, bulging, sometimes double vision. And I mean, most cases of thyroid eye disease are mild, but they're in some cases it could be debilitating. And, so doctors will typically recommend like corticosteroids or, things like prednisone, obviously surgery. There's a newer treatment called Tepezza. Um, but I'm always looking for natural options. You still want to find the underlying cause, the triggers, heal the gut. But interesting, not too long ago, I found that, berberine and alpha lipoic acid, which are typically known for helping with blood sugar, like a lot of people use berberine for like blood sugar management. It's also an antimicrobial or used like in SIBO, for example. I came across research showing that it could help with thyroid eye disease too by helping to reduce oxidative stress and, um, also supporting, at least in the case I think of berberine, like the gut microbiome. And yeah, just interesting that these are things that if you ask your medical doctor or if you're seeing an endocrinologist, they would have no idea. And again, to be fair, I didn't have any idea a few years ago either. Just it's trying to keep up with the research, which admittedly isn't easy to do. But yeah, there's so many different natural options out there. And again, different things work for different people. So I'll say that too. If there's one more hurdle, don't compare yourself to others because again, you might be I have a couple of Facebook groups and people might see stories of people getting great results just by changing their diet and someone changed their diet and they don't feel better and maybe their labs don't improve and they're like, this isn't working for me. And usually that's just saying that there's something else. It's not maybe in that person food was the main trigger, the main factor, but sometimes you do need to dig deeper. So always be hopeful. I mean, there's a cause, there's a reason why you developed, for those with a autoimmune thyroid condition, or really any other health condition, there's a reason for that. And it's just a matter of trying to find it. Sometimes for some people, I don't want to say it's easy, but maybe easier, whereas others, it definitely could be more challenging. You might need to do more detective work. But I like to believe that there is an underlying cause behind really every condition. And again, there's time and place for surgery, time and place for other conventional treatment methods. But yeah, like again, that's even if you're doing that, it's never going to hurt to change your diet and lifestyle at the very least. And I'll kind of leave it at that.
Absolutely, because if you're doing that, it's only going to help whatever other efforts you have in place. So it's basically just a way to foster success in any condition. If people wanted to learn more about you or wanted to listen to your podcast or work with you, where would you direct them to go?
Yeah, so it's weird. I have a couple of websites. Most people have one, but like years ago, my first website, naturalendocrinesolutions.com, is where I, I have like hundreds of articles and blog posts. And then when 2001, 2021, I came out with the Save My Thyroid podcast. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna have another website I like Save My Thyroid. And, I was like, I'm gonna have savemythyroid.com and put the podcast on there. And so I have like two websites, the Natural Endocrine Solutions mainly for the written content, and then Save My Thyroid for the podcast. Or of course, you could visit like Apple or Spotify or wherever you want to visit Save My Thyroid. If someone's interested in working with me, they could visit the website, or workwithdreric.com is a website. You could like visit that, and that'll actually redirect you to my savemythyroid.com website, where they give you some information to work with me. And yeah, my books, I actually have a new one that's about to come out too. It's called the Hyperthyroid Healing Diet. So my second one on hyperthyroidism, and this one focuses obviously more on the diet. I mean, I do have some diet information in my other books, but yeah, so definitely on Amazon you could check out my books, and yeah, those are pretty much the places that you could find me.
Perfect. I love that you're putting out a book around the diet and food because a lot of people, they know what they're supposed to do, but the how is the tricky part. So I love a
Yeah.
book about how. Thank you so much for making the time to do this today and sharing your wisdom on the biochemistry behind it all and just for everything that you do and helping people out. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks again, Dr. Christine. It was a, pleasure chatting with you. And yeah, I hope your listeners and viewers learns a lot.
I am positive that they did. So, anyone who wants to learn more, feel free to reach out to him or myself through whatever platform you're seeing this on or going to those websites. And have a great rest of your day.